Fondjoy's presence on the channel is so far 1-1, so this next one is the tiebreaker. So no pressure, right? This Justice League Batman from Fondjoy is provided by Calkeys.com. I want to give them a huge shout out for sending this over for me to review. If you guys want to check them out, the link is going to be either in the description or as a pinned comment to check out their site. They have other Fondjoy Batmans available as well as some other DC figures, whether they be from Fondjoy or some other companies. They also got some other import stuff, Haya, Godzilla, Gundams, Transformers, you name them. So check out the site. Again, affiliate links are going to be either in the description or in the pinned comment. And if you guys end up ordering something, use code DarkSpiderDavid to get 6% off your order. All right, guys, this is it. This is the one that I was kind of waiting on since so far we really are on the 50-50 scale when it comes to how I've been feeling about Fondjoy as a company, as a deliverer of Batman figures that can rival the likes of McFarlane, anyone that is really within the still kind of sort of basic consumer tier of price points, as far as something that's between the $25 to at most $40 to $45 price range before we start to get into prosumer tier with the likes of Mafex and Ace Figure Arts. The only caveat would have to be that they are a Chinese company, and therefore you practically have to import almost everything that they dish out. So, is that extra waiting time and shipping costs really worth it when it comes to a 1/9 scale representation of a live-action Batman? And right now, as far as where I sit, they're kind of 50-50. Their BVS Batfleck is absolutely quite stunning for the scale and for the price point, even if it comes with a couple of little qualms as far as proportioning, as far as how apish that head really looks, and also as far as some of the rigidness of the articulation. Even though it's not too bad, like I said, an awful lot of the pros really outweigh the cons with that one. It was really a great first impression. But then the sophomore outing, at least on the channel, I understand that there's other figures that came beforehand, but as far as the follow-up to that BVS, the Pattinson 2022 Batman legitimately felt rushed. I really don't get what exactly they were doing there. Full reviews are on the channel if you want me to go a little bit more in detail. So this next one was practically imperative since they're going back to what really worked before. Ben Affleck's Batman once again in the Snyderverse, only this time not from BVS, but rather from the contentious Justice League. It's funny because as far as what you see on the box, there's really no indicative way to tell which version of Justice League they're pulling from, whether it be the Joss Whedon version from 2017 or the Zack Snyder 4-hour cut from 2021. I guess if we want to, appease the masses, let's call it the Zack Snyder one, since I know that this is already going to flame up the comment section. However, there's one thing that's pretty certain. This is not necessarily my favorite suit. I gotta be honest. I'm not vibing with the Justice League suit. Between the BVS and the Justice League, I prefer the BVS. I like the much more Dark Knight Returns approach to that suit, how animalistic and very intimidating that suit looked. Here, it looks like we're borrowing traits from that original suit, still dealing within the Snyderverse interpretation that fits Ben Affleck, but they kind of toned it down. They kind of made him a little lankier as far as physique, as far as proportioning. Everything just looks a little bit trimmed down. The color scheming is just a bit darker and not as gray, not as in your face. The texturing is a little bit different. You got all these weird panels and such. That combined with my impressions of the Pattinson, all that stuff, there was a couple of hurdles that Fondjoy needed to come over to make this guy a winning bout to be added to my collection. And to be honest, they pulled it off. The sons of bitches pulled it off. Whew, man, I was, you had me in the first half, boys, I'm not gonna lie. And frankly, there's no other way to really proceed in the review without, of course, bringing in the original one that made the splash, the BVS Fondjoy Batman. Right there, right next to each other, and you can see the very blatant difference of the suit that I was really referring to because, yeah, they really did overhaul the suit quite a bit. I mean, like I said, there's an awful lot of details that they carried on over, predominantly the way that the bat symbol looks, except I remember the suit on the BVS having the much more angle look that the Justice League one has here, and then the Justice League one had a straighter wingspan, so it's kind of like they're flipped a little bit. But in terms of texturing, they really did kind of evolve it from here. But the color scheming is probably the thing that stands out to me the most, that they went for a much more darker aesthetic. They went for something a bit more muted. The color scheming for everything that makes up the copperish areas, we went from a brighter yellow or not so much yellow, but a much more copper-esque look from the BVS to a much more champagne look over on the Justice League. And you see that carried over quite a bit right here. But it's really the aesthetical differences to the cowl and overall that I didn't vibe with. And even then, I think that they massively improved what really worked on the BVS and carried on over here to the new Justice League version. You could see that right off the cuff, it does look like he's a little taller than the original BVS. So I found that to be kind of strange. I thought to myself, is it an optical illusion? Am I just really tripping balls over here? And then as I put him side to side, I'm like, nah, they actually did in fact kind of stretch him out a little bit, or they made somewhere in the torso area, shoulder area, to kind of fit a little bit of that lankier proportioning that they had going on for that original suit in live action, and interpreted in 1/9 scale format here for the bulk of the figure. So therefore, they kind of stretched. It's almost like taking the JPEG or the PNG, stretching him a little bit, narrowing him a little bit horizontally, and that's pretty much what you're kind of dealing with as far as proportioning versus the BVS. Which is kind of ironic since in that original review, I do remember that one of my little complaints about the bulkiness of the suit right here that I was favoring was that when you turn him over to the side, he's a little too flat, a little too planky as far as the abdominal piece. But here, because of the way that the suit is changed up and how much taller he is, I don't know what it is, but it fits better. To me, it just looks a whole lot better. So therefore, the criticisms that I had for the suit from the movie, not so much here, but rather from the movie as far as making the cowl just a little bit more narrow around the neck area. It kind of looks almost like it's vacuum sealed. The brows a little bit more firmer and kind of pulled down. You have a much more angular cone-like look to the cowl as opposed to the much more animalistic and intimidating and so far very brooding look to the original BVS that was, again, inspired from Dark Knight Returns. So even though objectively I still like this design choice as far as the suit, the way that it was designed and tailored in the movie, here it just favors the Fondjoy a whole lot better, and therefore it looks like the head sculpt is actually about the same size, but because of the modifications to not only the body but also the neckline, it looks like they kind of also narrowed down the head, and therefore when you look at the head versus the rest of the body, it doesn't look as massive and oversized as the BVS. So you notice that they managed to, I don't know if maybe they're looking at some of the comment sections. I don't know how it works over there in China as far as their access to social media, let alone YouTube. But somewhere down the line, it looks like maybe some of this information, when it came to the proportional nitpicks that we had with the original BVS, were carried on over, because I feel like so much of it has been refined and tailored here. And sure, it comes at the quote-unquote cost of him looking a little less bulky. I noticed that a little bit was shaved off as far as the musculature, specifically around the thigh area. I noticed that there's not as much bulging thigh muscle. There's not a whole lot going on for the biceps. They do look a little bit more on the narrower side. He doesn't look as chiseled around the abdominal area. But at least it favors the proportions to where everything just looks one-to-one composed, as opposed to how it looked like in the BVS. And that was already me loving the BVS Fondjoy, but now looking next to each other, I'm like, yo, we really did come a long way. And it's still managing to say a whole lot, considering that, again, not the biggest fan of this suit. I don't like the little panels that he's got going on the shoulders, on the biceps, on the abdominal, those little hexagonal pieces. I don't know what the hell's going on with that, all that lining. Though I do appreciate that even again, I really don't favor it on the suit itself. I like that they went the extra mile of actually overhauling the texture for the suit. It's very lined up right here, very rigid on the BVS, whereas on the new Fondjoy Justice League version, they actually overhauled the texture. It's not just this flat repaint because of the color scheme. They actually changed the texture, and you can feel the differences as far as what you feel on the thighs, the biceps, the abdominal area with those little lines and those panels, and even a few of the added straps on the gauntlets that actually added that on top of the surface. And like I mentioned before, the color scheming for some of the tips on the boots as well as the spikes on the gauntlets, they changed the color scheming to favor and look much more accurate to that of the Justice League. Even though it kind of looks like they didn't change much to the utility belt, it looks pretty much one-on-one identical, except there's a bit more black accents on the new Justice League as opposed to the way that it looked like on BVS. And yes, the likeness, despite again me preferring the actual design of the cowl on the BVS, it's still in fact Ben Affleck. You still got the chin, you still got the overall look, and even if you got a much more firmer and narrow brow to the point where you almost can't really see the eyes, I see the eyes alright, and there's still quite a bit of life behind them. It legit looks like a full-blown Ben Affleck head sculpt within that cowl. More so than I can even say for McFarlane and even some other companies, even down to some of the more prosumer ones like Mafex, where you can see a little bit of the likeness get lost in translation, but here, because of the bigger scale, there's a broader canvas that they're able to work with. And even with a cowl that I don't really favor, I can see Ben Affleck coming through there. I can see the eyes. I can see him staring me down. I would probably argue that the only thing that didn't really get overhauled and quite frankly got immensely duplicated was in fact the cape. It looks like it's identical to that of the BVS. I really couldn't pinpoint any real differences. Therefore, it's serviceable. I like the texture that's on the outside, but on the inside it feels a little kind of cheap. And then the wiring could be a little bit stronger, but at least it favors kind of completing the ensemble, making sure that it kind of, I don't want to say caresses, but it kind of curves and really encompasses the shoulders and kind of complements it to make sure that it doesn't get in the way. It doesn't feel as top heavy or kind of encumbersome to manage, so it does the job, but I do feel like they can maybe start to incorporate some stronger wiring, so some better positioning down the line could favor the figure and make him look very cool with some dynamic posing. And speaking of that posing, since this is the blueprint that they kind of build off of as far as taking what really worked right here and adding, like I said, the texture work, building him up in terms of height, because you can see he's practically a little bit taller. I don't know if it's because of the boots or whatever, but at the same time, making him lankier, they still managed to retain enough of the articulation that really worked here. And thank God that it's at least functionable, because you guys remember, for those of you who did not check out my review of the Fondjoy Pattinson, a little bit of a spoiler here, I really did not like the articulation on that guy, considering how loose and rather defective it came out. Thankfully, though, it looks like now they took their time with the Justice League once again, and this is exactly what I want them to do, because posing this guy and messing with the articulation is actually a fun and very pleasant experience. The head is able to rotate fully 360, no problem. Is able to look up slightly, so that could have been just a little better, but looking down is pretty favorable, especially when you kind of shift the head forwards and backwards on the little peg that's inside. And tilting side to side is also pretty favorable, no problems there. Vertical rotation on the arm can really be accomplished 360, right about right there. There is a hinge inside of the ball joint for the arm that can extend the arm almost at the full 180-degree flat angle right about right there. Unfortunately, not like the BVS, there's no kind of like real butterfly movement. You see a little bit of a washer poking itself out right there from inside of the shoulder joint right about right there, the little cutout. But at the same time, it doesn't really feel like it can really shrug or move in any kind of butterfly movement. So that's a little bit of a bummer, but at the same time, it's not quite 100% necessary there, because everything just feels really well constructed and very steadily built. There's something really stern about the way that all this feels, very tanky, but I like it. It's very quality. It feels like the money is going someplace. Then you have the biceps that can definitely rotate the full 360. They get a little squeaky here towards the back, but that's only because of how much bigger the bicep is, that it kind of starts to put a little bit of pressure on the top piece of the plastic for the shoulder, so just be mindful of that. But you do have two joints at the elbow that can almost bend all the way up, but because of the way that the bicep is sculpted due to the proportioning, it does kind of stop right about right there. So I kind of wish it could flex a little further upwards right there, but at the same time, once you move the arm, I can kind of start to overlook it a little bit. But there's technically movement happening on both joints. It's just the way that the overall design of the bicep and the gauntlet is there. Then you have the wrist that can fully rotate 360, no problem, as well as bend inwards and outwards slightly on the ball peg. But just be mindful that this is designed in a way where you can kind of nudge the wrists up and down, but when you go a little too far, because of the way that the cuff is designed and the way that the actual hand is placed on the joint due to a functionality we'll cover during the accessories, the hand does come off if you press it a little bit too far, so just be mindful of that. Then you get to the torso, which is surprisingly pretty flexible as far as rotation on the mid-torso cut right there that can fully move 360, no problem on the horizontal plane. Then you do have a little bit of crunching right there and some shifting from back to front. And you can see that crunching is absolutely no problem due to the way that this whole overall mid-torso cut is designed and cut out. So that's pretty cool. And even some crunching side to side. You just got to be careful that when you flex all the way forward, flexing towards the back, you kind of have to shift it in place with the peg. So it's almost like a little bit of a puzzle. But once you do that, you can shift it back and crunch side to side. Waist can't really rotate 360, can kind of nudge side to side, but due to the way that the belt is constructed, it's a little limiting, but definitely allows further flexibility towards the front and towards the back and even side to side, so that's awesome. Now, much like some other Fondjoys, even the Pattinson, you do have these two top leg joints that have a little bit of a dumbbell design to it, and because of that, you do get good flexibility towards the front about that far and towards the back, but of course when that happens, you get some major gappage as far as that dumbbell joint right there that then flexes towards the top and causes this kind of drop down functionality. Now, granted, this function does allow some good extension towards the sides, as you can kind of see it right about right there, but then once you kind of flex it back, you get this awkward posing, so you just got to make sure you take the leg and shift it back in place like that. So at least it allows for some cool posability. Just don't mind the awkwardness of the legs kind of dropping down and drooping right about right there. You just got to function and flip them back into their place right there. Two knee joints that fully bend all the way up and feel pretty good in hand. Then we get to the ankles, where again, this is where the major crux of the Pattinson came into play, but thankfully it's actually the first joint that I started to mess with when I pulled this guy right out of the box. As soon as I pulled him out, I was like, please check those ankle joints, please, for the love of Christ. And I'm happy to report that they're really good. They fully rotate the foot 360, no problem. And then when it comes to shifting in practically every direction, forward, backward, and even side to side, all you got to do is just make sure to kind of press it out of the way of the cuff of the boot, the top piece of the boot, or rather the lower piece that meets up with the ankle. And when you do that, you're able to practically shift the foot in any kind of direction. You just got to, like I said, kind of fit it and futz with it in place, because you just have the other edge, the corresponding edge of the cuff getting in the way. But when you kind of press it out of the way, you're able to pretty much pivot the foot in every kind of angle, and it never feels loose, has never come off in either one of the feet. So that's really delightful to see, and it really feeds into the possibility of this figure to make sure that it's standing upright and you got your sense of balance. You technically do have toe joints, but I do kind of wish that they flex a little further up, but they do manage to bend somewhat there at the 45-degree angle. So you see that an awful lot of the articulation is pretty much carried on over from the BBS, but thankfully the construction of that articulation, the joints, the flexibility, and even on top of that, the actual build quality of the plastic, it feels solid, it feels firm, it feels like something that I would happily so far pay $45 for just by itself. Now, granted, they also still managed to include some extra accessories, though there are a couple of little nitpicks that I do have with the assortment that we got this time around. Much like with the BVS, you'll notice that in the articulation portion, the hands could come off if you press them a little bit too far, and that's because you can technically interchange the hands with two additional pairs that he comes with. One pair is shaped with this kind of triggering gesture, and then the other one is sculpted in a pinch holding gesture, and that's because either of these hands could be used to hold either the grapple gun or, of course, the batarangs. The batarangs are sculpted pretty much exactly identical to that of the BVS, but much like I mentioned with the slight accents of like the copper versus the champagne look of the Justice League versus the BVS, the batarangs follow suit. As you notice right there, instead of silver, they are now like this darker, more opaque kind of champagne color. Apart from that, they're exactly the same. And likewise, the grapple gun is exactly the same, sculpted identically, except this time we got a little bit of an overhaul with the color scheming. The black is the same, but you'll notice that every piece that's chrome has now got that opaque kind of shade to it, and it looks like an added paint application is on one side right there that wasn't included before. But everything else is the same. The handle does have a much darker brown as opposed to the brighter brown that we had going on for the BVS version. So apart from that, it's exactly the same grapple. And as you swap out the hands, pose them with the batarangs or the grappler, you of course can utilize the included bases to pose them with. And they're pretty much exactly the same exact kind of base, even down to the ratcheted arm, which is really cool. As I mentioned before, I really like this arm because of the rigidness of the ratcheted joints right here that are very stern, very firm. They really do lock in place. So any kind of dynamic posing that you really want to put this guy in, and even the spring-loaded mechanism to the arm here, the little pinching arm at the top, is really cool. But, however, I do kind of would appreciate it if some extra attention to detail would be placed on the logo as well as the lettering for the base itself, because much like the BVS, The lettering for the actual word Batman there on the front plate, the characters are a little misaligned. And the BVS symbol on the original looks fine, but it does look like, if you look a little closely, the JL on the new Justice League version is a little off center. So I kind of wish that they would have spent a little bit of extra time TLCing that, because it stands out. I'm sorry. I'm going to be one of those collectors that I kind of wish that they would spend some extra time there, because otherwise I am quicker to probably commission someone to create or 3D print a much more better looking base, to be honest. I mean, come on, keeping up with my food analogies, you could have an amazing steak at a restaurant, but if you have a side where the majority of the potatoes are cooked, but then you have that one raw potato in there, there's a really, really strong chance you're gonna still remember that raw potato, no matter how great that steak was. And frankly, that about does it for the accessories of the Justice League version. And you'll notice that right here, I do have a little bit of a bone to pick with Fondjoy, because they didn't really stop there with the BVS. Of course, this is necessarily meant to be screen accurate. The BVS version came with the breathalyzer that allows you to swap out the mouth plate for the breathalyzer plate. And sure, you can argue that this is technically not accurate to BVS, but it was to Suicide Squad because he had the breathalyzer in that movie. So Justice League would have been kind of cool to include something else, except it doesn't. The accessories really do stop with what you see right here. And then that also reminded me that the BVS came with a very unorthodox thumbs up hand for the right hand to be able to swap it with. That really about does it for the hands, just the basic addition. And that kind of got my thought process going, thinking that maybe, just maybe, we're slowly approaching the time where Fondjoy needs to start experimenting with different gestures of hands. We need to start including some extending hands, some gesturing hands, something kind of aerodynamic. I don't know. I don't know what the case may be. It depends on character, depends if we're dealing with Batman versus Superman versus Wonder Woman, etc. But I really do think that we need to start throwing in that third pair, or maybe having the second pair just be something other than just the pinching for the batarangs. Maybe come up with some asymmetric hands where one is holding the batarang but then the other one's pointing, or the other one is doing some kind of aggressive kind of clenching hand like this, like it's in pain. I don't know, something that other companies like Mafex, Figuarts, or even McFarlane likes to play around with from time to time, because the basics are going to start to get, well, a little basic, which is most definitely not what I went with here as far as this unit that was sent over to me, because this is about it for the standard editions. If you opt in for the deluxe editions, you do get an alternate Ben Affleck head sculpt, and this is the version that came with the BVS that you guys remember in that original review I was praising for having an amazing likeness and detail to that of Ben Affleck. This is literally like a 1/9 scale mini Ben Affleck head sculpt that you don't even have to pay an arm and a leg for, and here it is within the $50 range, and it looks immaculate. It looks amazing and awesome. So what did Justice League do? Well, it still looks like Ben Affleck. This is the Justice League version that comes into the deluxe version of this figure. And even though the likeness is most definitely there, it's still miles above what McFarlane does. It's still better than what any other company has done so far. And this is coming from a $50 figure. I would argue it's a little bit, just a tiny little bit, like we're talking 5 to 10% of a downgrade, in my opinion. You can, again, I must reiterate, I can still tell that that's Ben Affleck. They still got so many good characteristics of his likeness down in this little 1/8 scale likeness. And I like the fact that it's technically not a repaint. You'll notice that his expression does look a little softer. He's even got a little bit of the looseness for the hair, where it's kind of dripping here from the side as opposed to the super slicked back look to the way that he had here in the BVS version. And the complexion is slightly different, but something just feels a little lost as far as life behind the eyes. Now, you can make the argument that that's kind of how Ben Affleck felt towards the end of his run as Batman with the personal stuff that he was dealing with. But still, I kind of wish that they would have added just a little bit or taken their time just a little. I don't know what it is, but there's something of a downgrade here. Again, this is still so much better than what we got going on with, like I said, McFarlane, where they're opting to use the stunt double. I really am still bewildered by the fact that Fondjoy is still able to retain the likeness to be able to give us really great Ben Affleck head sculpts. But if I had my way here, I would have just appreciated a slight repaint of the original BVS and maybe just sculpted the hair to look like it does here. And of course, I know that having both of these in hand means that I can kind of do a little bit of a swapperoo and include the BVS head with the Justice League head, and therefore I can kind of have my cake and eat it too, so to speak. But if I was to, again, objectively criticize, I do think that the BVS one looks a little better as far as likeness, as far as having, like I said, a little bit of that live peering through. But for what you're paying for, especially if you just add the extra $5 to $10 for the deluxe edition, this is still not a bad deal as far as getting a head sculpt that looks like Ben Affleck. It's articulated at the top of the neck piece. Popping it in is no problem. You even got the collar piece right here to be able to do the swap, no problem. And overall, it still completes the look of having a weathered Batman uncowled with the body that is now refined. It definitely looks badass up on the shelf. So, does this mean that Fondjoy cooked with the new Justice League Batman, considering that this is not necessarily my favorite version of the Batfleck suit? Granted, I'm probably in the minority that probably prefers it over the tactical suit, but even saying that, the amount of improvements that they objectively made on the buck itself, as far as the articulation, as far as proportioning, as far as making sure that you're getting a shrunken down 1/9 scale Ben Affleck, as far as the way that the suit complements itself, as far as the screen accuracy to, again, the color scheming, the way that the cowl is sculpted out, the likeness to Affleck, not only through the cowl with the mouthpiece, but also with the added head sculpt that you can only get with the deluxe edition. Yeah, this is honestly a return to form, as a lot of video game journalists like to say these days. A return to form with Fondjoy. Granted, I wish that they would start evolving a little bit with the accessories, not only kind of differentiating with some of the hand accessories, but maybe tossing in a little bit of extra, since they're kind of pulling away from what they've had before with the unorthodox thumbs up, or even the added mouth plate piece right there. Maybe the parademon gun that he kind of used temporarily during the Justice League movie. Those are my criticisms, but frankly, I do believe that Fondjoy is back. We are back, boys, and even though I still wish that something else would have been incorporated as far as the rigidness of the cape, or accessories, or again, some attention to detail behind the base, those are really the things that are keeping it from escalating it past a very, 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 very low 9 out of 10. I was dancing back and forth if this is like an 8 or a 9, but frankly, I was just so pleased with the figure. There were certain poses that just looked so showy to me, as far as putting it up on that base with the rigidness of the arm and having it dynamically look like he's flying through the air or throwing a batarang. And I'm like, you know what? This is probably, and this is a bold statement, my favorite Fondjoy so far. And I'm hoping that they can keep this momentum. And I'm also very pleased to see that, again, this is back to formula for Fondjoy. And if they can keep this up, they're definitely a name in the game that can provide some competition to the likes of McFarlane. Of course, there's still that hurdle that we have to get through as far as importing. But man, oh man, I'm still signed up for them, and I'm hoping that maybe Pattinson was simply just a fluke that could be fixed with a 2.0 later down the line. But for now, I'm eager to see what their armored Batman's going to look like, the Nightmare Batman, the 2.0 for Man of Steel or BVS Superman, and some other incarnations of Batman, as far as Keaton, as far as maybe a Kilmer or a Clooney. I don't know. The sky's kind of becoming a little bit of the limit if the DC license can still be held by Fondjoy in really capable hands of delivering on quality products, and I'm here to see it. For now, I want to hear if you guys have in some capacity owned a Fondjoy figure so far. Do you guys own one that came before the official licensing of DC or after with the BVS? This new Justice League, do you have it coming in? Is it in hand already? How do you guys feel about that Pattinson? Am I the only one that probably got a defect, or is it like a widespread issue? I really want to start a dialogue as far as what kind of impression Fondjoy is having on the community thus far. And if you guys want to get your own Justice League Batman, that I fully recommend, because like I said, Fondjoy is back to cooking, and I feel like this is one very worthy of being in your collection, then like I mentioned before, Kalki's has your back. They ship, it takes about a week or so, week and a half or so, because you're importing from China, but they're very effective with their communication. It came on the time that they said it was going to, and it's pretty comparable with price. It's available now in stock over at cowkeys.com. Link is going to be in the description. There's even a discount code to get 6% off your order. Just use code DarkSpiderDavid. And like I said, links are going to be either in the description or in the pinned comment. And while you guys are down there checking that out, make sure to hit the thumbs up button on this video if you enjoyed it. Thumbs down if you did not. And as always, stay humble. I'll catch you guys later.